Okay. Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another exciting talk by your favorite speaker, Ronald J. Brown. Our topic for today is one of these exciting New York stories about Captain Kidd, New York's most famous pirate. Well, on the right, you see me standing on the entrance to the chapel in the hotel where I stay on Fire Island. And Long Island has a long history, as we're going to see, of pirates. Now, I have met people on Long Island digging for pirate treasure and all kinds of things. So let's get going on our discovery of New York's most famous pirate. Okay, now our outline. Who was Captain Kidd? Very important. And then his midlife crisis in the year 1695. Yes, back those days, people did have midlife crises. And then the lost pirate treasures of Long Island. Long Island is reputable as having tons of buried treasures. And then remembering Captain Kidd, the legacy, and other pirates. So let's get going. Well, there's a painting of Captain Kidd. He was born in Scotland in 1654. During that year when he was born, New Amsterdam was still the name of New York City, and you see it on the right, and you see the city wall surrounding the old Dutch town of New Amsterdam, and you see the wall going kitty-cornered across the straight line there. That is today Wall Street. So this was a rather small town, about maybe 15,000 people, not much more. And it was New Amsterdam. Captain Kidd was born to a rather good family. You can see he was rather dressed, a very ambitious person. And like many ambitious people, he decided to leave Scotland and to seek his fortune elsewhere. Well, when he arrived in New York, the city had already been taken over by the English in 1664, and it was growing. We see at the very bottom, there was Fort Amsterdam, which was built by the Dutch. Broadway goes from the bottom left-hand corner straight through in a line the city. That was Broadway. The Dutch wall was torn down and it became Wall Street. At the end of Wall Street was the slave market, and all the wealthy people lived on Wall Street. The stock market would eventually go there. Other streets, Pearl Street, and the English built another wall because, don't forget, the French were in Quebec, the Spanish were in Florida and expanding northward, the French were in the Mississippi Valley, and so the East Coast English colonies were in a rather precarious position. When the English took over, they announced that henceforth it would be the colony of New York. The city would be known as New York, and the English were firmly in control. One of the very first things they did was build Trinity Episcopal Church, the Church of England, which we see at the bottom on the left. 1697, rather modest structure. That church burned in the Great Fire of 1776, and the second one, the middle picture, was built in 1788, That one was not very well built and started falling apart even before it was finished. And so in 1839, the third church, the current Trinity Episcopal Church, was built. You see a painting of it, a drawing of it, and on the right you see what the entrance looks like today, looking down Wall Street. So the English were definitely making the city an English-speaking city. Captain Kidd married Sarah Ort Bradley and ended up having a number of children. Here we see a painting of Sarah, and we see that she was a rather well-to-do woman. So good old Captain Kidd knew that if he wanted to be successful, he had to marry well. Pearl Street was one of the main streets in the city, and we see what it looked like along the water. Now, today, that street and the water beside it in the East River has been filled in, and it is pretty much now, Pearl Street is no longer on the water. It is quite a ways inland, and it you can see from the map on the right that it goes along the water through the financial district and then up to the Brooklyn Bridge. Well, Captain Kidd ended up doing well. He married well and ended up speculating on waterfront property. The picture on the right, we see the slave market of New York City at the end of Wall Street. And he started buying and selling Wall Street and Pearl Street and Water Street and Pine Street real estate. He was a wheeler and a dealer. He was the businessman wheeling and dealing, sort of the Donald Trump of his age. And these are some of the properties that he would buy. For example, Wall Street, 56 Wall Street, was prime real estate. Wall Street at that time had a large number of businesses. The wealthy people lived there because it was a very broad street and it was relatively quiet. The north-south axis on Manhattan was, of course, Broadway, and Wall Street was a very pleasant street to live on. The new city hall was built on Wall Street by the English, and it was very, very successful. Here we see a painting of the New York City elite. In the distance, we see the Dutch fort with St. Nicholas Church inside, and the old Knickerbocker families of New York lived well, and Captain Kidd married into the upper class families. And the Knickerbockers were a mixture of English, some French Huguenots, some Dutch, and some German families who had come to New Amsterdam and later New York and did well. And so there was a New York City elite. Now, they weren't on Fifth Avenue yet. They were on Wall Street and Broadway. And so he was kowtowing with the city elite. Well, the time of the late 1600s was a rather confusing time. At one point, a leader named Leisler rose up and kicked out the English and returned the city to Dutch rule from 1689 to 1691. The famous Leisler's Revolt, and he was summarily executed for causing political chaos. Well, at the age of 41, this well-to-do, well-established person in New York had a midlife crisis. He had married well. He had become a well-to-do New Yorker doing real estate. And at the age of 41, he found that his life was getting rather empty. What do I do? Well, he didn't get rid of his wife and run off with his secretary, but he decided that he wanted some excitement. So he was given the title of a privateer by Governor Benjamin Fletcher in 1695. Now, a privateer was someone licensed by the government to attack and capture ships belonging to enemy countries. Now, today we would call them pirates, but back then it was a legal profession. The English ruled the sea, but the Spanish still ruled Central and South America up to California and down to Argentina. And they were shipping tons of gold and silver and other treasures back to Spain. And so these big caravans, these fleets of ships, which would gather in places like Cuba, Havana Harbor, and then, protected by naval ships, cross the Atlantic to Spain, where they enriched Spain. And so Governor Fletcher gave him the charter to become a privateer. Well, gold and silver and treasures from the Spanish-controlled areas of America, mainly Mexico and Peru, were sailing across the Atlantic and making Spain rich. And we see the land controlled by Spain. At the bottom, we see Argentina going up through what is today Chile, Peru, Colombia, Central America, Mexico, and even at points the Mississippi Valley, Florida, Cuba, and these areas were phenomenally rich. And the ships were sailing ships, which would be filled with gold bars and gold coins and silver, and would sail across the Atlantic and to Spain. So these were tempting targets for both pirates who were doing their own looting and privateers who were licensed by, sometimes by the government in London or by a governor in one of the colonies. A lot of pirates were in North Africa, today's Morocco and Algeria, and they would sail out and intercept the ships as they approached Spain. So privateers and pirates was very big business, very tempting, and just capturing 1 gallon filled with gold coins like we see in the picture would be enough to make a man a very rich man. Sugar was also a tempting target because places like Cuba and French Haiti and Dominican Republic was another target for privateers. And once again, most of the sugar consumed in Europe was coming from the Spanish colonies, and Even the French government ended up grabbing what is today Haiti. The English government took over the island of Jamaica and other islands in the Caribbean just to get a foothold in the sugar trade. So a lot of very wealthy ships were crossing the Atlantic and were tempting targets. Well, New York emerged as a pirate utopia. It was a wealthy city. Under the English, it was being filled with immigrants from all over. It was still Dutch and English, but still there were French Huguenots, large numbers of Germans had settled there. The Irish Catholics were slowly starting to leave, but that would only become a major wave of immigration in the 1830s and 40s. New York was a very safe harbor. You sailed in through what is today the Verrazano Straits, and the harbor, both along the Hudson River and the East River, were protected from the ocean storms. And New York was a growing city. It was a wealthy city. It was not a plantation city. It was a city of business, import, export. The number one export of New York was beaver pelts because the beaver skin was water repellent. And so later on, people like John Jacob Astor made a fortune exporting beaver pelts to China, to Europe, to Russia. And so New York became known as a pirate utopia. You could buy and sell anything at the stores along Broadway and Wall Street. And what New York didn't want, it would export to the other colonies. New York was a major actor in the slave trade as well. Ships would come to New York. The New Yorkers would take whatever they wanted as slaves, and the rest would be exported to the other colonies. And so New York became notorious as a privateer and pirate capital. And another thing we can't neglect is along Long Island and New Jersey, there are many inlets, many bays where a ship could sail in, unload its gold bars, bury them where only a few people knew about, and then sail out for another raiding expedition. Now, a pirate or privateer. A pirate commits acts of violence without official sanction. Pirate hunting was done by government and privateers because pirates were working for their own interest and they kept their loot. And a pirate would attack any ship. It had no loyalty to a particular country or colony. Privateers, like Captain Kidd, were hired, licensed by the colony of New York to attack Spanish and Portuguese and French ships. Although the governor, Fletcher, had to be careful because sometimes England was at war with France, other times they were at peace. So he had to know which ships were legitimate targets. Privateer would come back to New York, unload his loot, sell it in the market, and the government took its portion as taxes. A pirate would not come to New York because he would risk being arrested or shot or hung. And so they would land in places like Long Island, where they would hide their treasure and sell it off slowly, or the pirate would go to another colony, become a legitimate immigrant. Nobody knew about his past, and then eventually move to New York as a respectable citizen, knowing full well where he had buried his ill-gotten loot. Well, gradually, good old Captain Kidd went a little bit too far and was moving from a legitimate privateer to a pirate. On January 30th, 1698, he attacked a British merchant ship, which was owned by the East India Company. East India Company was a private company built up by wealthy British businessmen. There was also the West India Company, which did business with the Caribbean islands and the 13 colonies in Jamaica and other British possessions. These were companies, like today, a corporation of wealthy businessmen. They would invest money, send a ship to China, come back with tea or silks from Asia or gems from India, and the owners of the ship would divide the profits. Now, of course, if the ship sank, which many of them did, each of the owners shared in the loss. So no one person went bankrupt. That's the idea of a corporation. Well, Captain Kidd attacked the Quedagh merchant ship, which was owned by the East India Company. Well, of course, the East India Company was upset. And they put a price on his head, saying you were a privateer and only allowed to attack Spanish galleons crossing the Atlantic. Well, this was the beginning of the decline and fall of one of the most notorious privateer who became a virtual pirate of New York. Well, when he was arrested, New York was in a period of chaos again, and eventually it was the rule of Governor Edward Hyde, whose portrait we see on the left, the notorious cross-dresser. That portrait of Governor Edward Hyde hangs at the New York Historical Society. And he was out to really stamp his presence on the city. Well, pirates were the danger, but privateers were a source of great wealth. So Governor Edward Hyde saw that Captain Kidd was a target because he had become a pirate. And everybody knew that every pirate had tons of gold stashed away on Long Island. And so Governor Edward Hyde, who was in constant need of money, spent a fortune on clothing for himself and his wife. And so he decided that he was going to shake down Captain Kidd. Governor Edward Hyde was a very skilled general in the British Army, rather poor governor since he was only here 6 years, very loyal to England and loyal to the Episcopal Church. In the middle, we see him in his younger years as a very successful English gentleman. Captain Kidd was arrested in New York by the branch of the East India Company. He was held and he was put into prison. Here we see a drawing of the arrest of Captain Kidd and his imprisonment by the East India Company with the support of Governor Edward Hyde. Once again, everybody was convinced that even when he was a legal privateer, he was also sidelining as a pirate and had treasures buried all over Long Island, and they were eager to get their hands on it. And of course, East India House, Capitol building, which we see in the picture on the right, was eager to recuperate the losses that they had incurred by the pirate Kidd. Well, gradually, England declared war against piracy. The proclamation for suppressing of pirates of King George I of Great Britain in 1717. England was a growing power and realized that piracy was very dangerous for the British Empire. Already the British Navy was very powerful, but patrolling the oceans from English North America, today's Canada and the United States, colonies in Africa, especially South Africa, India, Australia, the British Empire was growing. 1707, it was the kingdoms of England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland were all united unto the United Kingdom. And so the British started clamping down on pirates, and unfortunately, Captain Kidd was one of the victims. Here we see his tombstone. He was executed in 1699. And that marked the end of the career of Captain Kidd. So England declared war against pirates, and it made a big example of executing the Captain Kidd. Here we see a drawing of Kidd hanging in chains, awaiting his death. On the right, we see the Pirates' Stairs leading to the site of execution dock at Wapping, where Kidd was hanged. The old stone steps were visible beneath the modern iron bridge. He was executed in London and left hanging there as an example of what happens to pirates. King George was no longer going to put up with piracy. England ruled the seas. Later on, they would say the sun never set on the British Empire, and the British war on pirates was going to be ruthless. Well, this was the golden age of piracy, was 1650s to 1730s. There were many pirates who made a fortune. We see the Pirate King, the strange adventures of Henry Avery, and the birth of the golden age of piracy. The late 1600s was a golden age. Many people became fabulously wealthy, and they would set themselves up in various places. The colonies, sometimes a notorious pirate would settle in a Portuguese colony, which became Brazil or South America, even in Africa. a pirate would go with his wealth, take over an area, and become king of his own colony. So this was a remarkable period, and Captain Kidd was one of the leaders of this golden age. Now, the legends abound regarding the lost treasures. As we can see from the map, Long Island is filled with little bays, little harbors, islands scattered all over. If you look at the far right-hand side, you see Ald, which is today famous as the Hamptons, but it was an isolated places where a ship could go in, unload its wealth, and then go out and capture another ship. And so the legends of the lost pirate treasures of Long Island remain today. I've met people on Long Island who were convinced they had bought a map that showed the location of buried treasure. There's people at flea markets in the city will come up with an old parchment map showing a treasure. Long Island had a rather bad history as far as shipping was concerned. Here we see them postcard, greetings from Fire Island State Park. Along Long Island, people would go to the shore, they would make a big fire, and at night, ship sailing would say, oh, that must be a town, that must be a harbor, and they would sail to the fire. And of course, there was only a fire and there were a bunch of robbers. And so as soon as the ship approached and saw that there was nothing there, that it was only a fire, it was already at risk of running aground. And so the locals from Long Island would go out, loot the ship, very often burn it and kill the crew, and again bury their treasures along Long Island. And so the area abounds in legends of lost pirate treasures. New York was the central place for this wonderful age of piracy. And maps and accounts such as the one on the right of where the treasure was buried continue to thrill treasure seekers. A great book is The Golden Age of Piracy, a captivating guide to the role of pirates in maritime history during the early modern period, including stories of Anne Bonny, Sir Francis Drake, and of course, our very own William Kidd. Where are Captain Kidd's treasures? Well, one of the most searched places is Gardiner's Island, which is way out at the end of Long Island, just across from Connecticut and even Rhode Island. And this is believed to be the place where he buried a lot of his treasures. Even when he was a legitimate privateer, he never missed up an opportunity to loot a silver or gold ship from whoever owned it. Various articles have been written. For example, the article on the right, how it got there, cargo of gold, jewels, silks, buried on Gardiner's Island off of Long Island. It said he buried a box of gold and a chest of other treasures 1 mile from the manor house on the east end of the island. Then he started negotiating with Lord Bellomont, governor of New York, offering this treasure worth, at the time, $50,000 in exchange for his life. And so, until the very end, both in New York when he was arrested and in England when he was executed, he still had hopes of buying all his freedom to governors and other authorities and military in exchange for revealing the location of one of his treasure chests. And it wasn't just the south side of Long Island that was filled with little harbors and little bays, but there are Pirate Cove in Port Jefferson in New York, on the North Shore, not far from Smithtown and Port Washington. All of these little bays and inlets are famous for pirate treasure. Now, I grew up and went to high school and college in Erie, Pennsylvania, which has its own Erie Harbor and stories of Lake Erie pirates looting French ships and English ships and American ships later on, burying their treasure on Presque Isle, which is today a state park. So when I was in college, we were constantly going up digging for pirate treasures, even on Lake Erie. And on the upper right, you see a cove. This is a little protected area. Harbor would be much bigger, but these little coves are all along the north and the south shore of Long Island. In Port Jefferson, we see the Pirates Cove, a restaurant, and there you see a typical view of a pirate, the skull and the crossbones on his belt, a hook for one hand and holding up a sword with the other one. This is the mystique of the freelance pirate. Another popular pirate story on Long Island is Pirate Charles Gibb, and this is Southampton Beach. And this is another story of buried treasures. He lived from 1798 to 1831, one of the last of the Golden Age pirates. Once again, we see the book Dead Men Tell No Tales, the lives and legends of the pirate Charles Gibbs. Joseph Gibbs, I believe, is his son. And so we see still another great pirate story. Well, there's a lot to Pirate Charles Gibb because he was caught and executed, and his skull is at the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen, where his skull was kept. You see it on the right, and the books were written about him as a famous person. And here we see the society's headquarters at 20 West 44th Street. And so another fascinating New York pirate story. Another person who was commissioned as a privateer by Governor Fletcher, but also turned to piracy. And he died probably 1697, another famous pirate, and he specialized in attacking slave ships coming across the Atlantic to South America, North America. He would intercept a ship and bring its slave cargo to New York. And once again, New York, because of the pirates and the privateers, was a major destination for slaves. If you look at the map on the right, you see the area going directly to New York. New York was the banking and the money capital of the 13 colonies, and it dominated the slave trade. Some of the richest people in New York at that time were major slave traders. Well, New York's famous Long Island has spawned an entire industry about piracy. Here we see Long Island Treasure Hunt. We invite you to search our online network for hidden treasures, maps showing the location of buried treasures. People can hire a voyant to look into the crystal ball to find a location for a treasure map. People go along the beach with metal detectors, coming up, hopefully, with a treasure chest filled with treasures. And so Captain Kidd and the other New York City pirates have really made Long Island the centerpiece of the hunt for lost treasures. Well, Captain Kidd continues to fascinate people. We see the pirate hunter, and we see Captain Kidd, the story of Captain Kidd. Charles Laughton's famous movie Captain Kidd, the Captain Kidd models, where you can build your own Captain Kidd pirate ship, fascinates people until today. The Great Adventures of Captain Kidd, King of Pirates. In fact, he was famous for not only targeting gold ships from Spain filled with gold, and later on English and French ships, but he even went against other pirates. In the middle, Captain William Kidd, describing every aspect of his life in a board game. Captain Kidd's crew experiments with sinking and floating. Pirates are very much a part of history. In fact, many of the well-to-do families of New York trace their ancestry and their wealth back to piracy. Daniel Defoe's A General History of the Pirates, putting pirates into the economic system of the world. We don't think of piracy as a major business enterprise, but if you were a pirate, you had to get rid of your gold. You were to invest it in real estate. You were going to take over an area in Africa or North Africa and set up your own pirate kingdom. So piracy has been explored and researched as a major business enterprise, especially in the golden age of the late 1600s. And of course, every pirate story spawns thousands of other pirate stories. For example, pirate legends and ghost pirates, where the ship is still sailing on the ocean even after the pirates themselves had died. Story of ghost ships still sailing. On Long Island in West Sayville, there was the Long Island Maritime Museum. And this is Sayville on the south shore of Long Island. In fact, Sayville is where I take the ferry when I go to the Fire Island, which is a sand barrier where I go on vacation. And it is part of a large number of museums devoted to maritime history. And of course, piracy plays a large part of it. And they have collected all kinds of information on the pirate culture, the lost pirates, pirate legends, maps of lost treasures that people still have to discover. The cult of pirates is alive today. The proverbial skull and bones, a secret society, mysterious secret society at Yale University. In fact, they're so secret that people don't know how many famous people were part of this secret society. Now, they weren't in piracy, but many of them ended up becoming very wealthy alum of Yale University. Skull and Bones is probably one of the most famous of these Ivy League secret societies. Once again, drawing on the memory and the lore and the mystery of piracy. We always recognize a pirate when we see it. When we see one, eye patches are legendary for pirates, peg legs, hooks on one hand, and the proverbial parrot on the shoulder. Kids dress up for Halloween parties as pirates. They've become sort of a symbol of private enterprise, entrepreneurs, even we use the word pirate in a very positive sense. It doesn't have any negative connotations anymore. Well, the cutlass is the private weapon of a pirate, cutting and slashing people. Here again, we see the eye patch and bad teeth. So if you're going to become a pirate, you have to get some black paste and cover over a couple of your teeth or paint them gold or something else. In fact, famous gold pirate tooth, which you can buy and paste over your tooth. Douglas Fairbanks, in his famous movie, The Black Pirate, no longer English or Spanish, but everybody wants to cash in on the pirate lore. Let out your inner pirate. Liberate yourself. Let your hair down. Be free. Talking like a pirate, identifying with pirates is sort of something that inspires everybody. September 19th is International Talk Like a Pirate Day. The jargon of pirates, what pirate culture was like, the adventure, the mystique of sailing out into the sea, attacking a ship laden with gold, and returning, hiding at some place, and then settling into a city like New York, where yesterday's pirate is today's leading citizen. 16 best pirate movies for kids. Kids love pirates. It's liberating. I'm going to grow up and become a pirate, 25 pirate romance novels. Of course, pirates are not famous for settling down, getting married, and having a car in the suburbs. They are sort of like the cowboy allure. Love them and leave them. And the wild women who would hook up with a pirate go sailing off, only to be killed in a battle, or women even wearing the patch, taking up the cutlass, and identifying with pirates. On the right, how I became a pirate. Aspiring kids, pirate boy, the night of the pirates. Pirates don't change diapers, meaning if you fall in love with a pirate, don't expect him to settle down and join the church and the country club and go to PTA meetings, because that's not what the pirate lore is all about. Pirates were seeking adventure, setting off. Good chance of dying, good chance of being caught by another pirate and executed, but also the good chance of grabbing a treasure ship. We see Walter Scott's The Pirates, historical novel based on the life of notorious pirate John Gough. A pirate looks at 40. Once again, midlife crisis. Well, with Captain Kidd, he had his midlife crisis and became a pirate. Other pirates, probably at the age of 40 or something, have a midlife crisis and decide maybe now it's time to take my loot, settle in New York, become a respectable citizen, go to church on Sunday, and be mainstream. More books are being written about the Pirate Queen. The story of Grace O'Malley, the famous Irish pirate. Blackbeard the pirate, the seas have never seen their like. Another pirate movie, The Pirates of Penzance, by the starring Joseph Depp and Gilbert and Sullivan's music. Again, praising the lore of the pirate. And there you see him with his sword. You see his one eye patch. He doesn't have a hook leg, peg leg, but here again, attracting women by the throng to celebrate his great success. The recent Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, with my favorite actor, Johnny Depp. Here again, everything you ever wanted to know about the Pirates of the Caribbean. Almost every island in the Caribbean has fascinating pirate stories, stories of buried treasure. Well, New York remains the pirate capital of the world, because as a city where only money counts, anybody could show up with the sleaziest background and you could buy your way into good society. We see here the pirate business, shade of Captain Kidd. I thought I knew the pirate business. Well, welcome to New York, where even the antics and the career of Captain Kidd fade in comparison to pirate stories of Wall Street, where corporate raiders, the Pirate of Wall Street, Bernie Madoff, the Wizard of Lies, where he is part of this rich New York City tradition of money of piracy of anything goes. Pirates of Financial Freedom. Here again, a novel updating the pirate myth, no longer sailing ships across the Atlantic to get gold bars, but cruising the streets of around Wall Street, the stock market, the banks, the investment companies, the modern day financial pirate. Pirate money, discovering the founders' hidden plan for economic justice and defeating the Great Reset. American oligarchs. Here we see the Kushners, the Trumps, who are the modern day pirates, corporate raiders, we call them. Donald Trump, Al Capone, John Dillinger, Fred Barker, Lucky Luciano, Vito Genesi, Frank Costello. These were the pirates of the modern age. Now, of course, we use the word pirates, but we can say that's the mob sailing around looking for treasures, gangsters, Chicago gangs, looting the economies of foreign countries and of their own country, and very often going to war one against the other. Fascinating book by Barry James Dyke, The Pirates of Manhattan, systematically plundering the American consumer. Here again, portraying the pirates of Wall Street today. Here again, you admire them. I mean, so many people admire people like Donald Trump and the pirates and Bernie Madoff because they incorporated that pirate spirit. Can do, ruthless, go from nothing to multi-billionaires, and then even build a big Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue, proclaiming your success. Not being ashamed of it, but part of this money-making culture of Wall Street. Well, the United States, following independence, declared a war against piracy. These are the Barbary pirates of North Africa. And the American government established a navy. Every state of the first 13 states had to supply a battleship, and they went and they stamped out pirates on the North Atlantic. So that's what happens. Once you become a respectable country, then you go against piracy because you had your golden age and made New York great with pirate money. But now that you're a respectable country and it's American merchant ships exporting cotton to Europe that were being plundered by pirates from North Africa. You see the book by C.S. Foster, The Barbary Pirates, United States Navy going against the pirates. So the United States, while we still admired pirates and New York was filled with pirates, well, today, as long as it was happening inside the New York Stock Exchange or banks or corporations, then it was okay. Now, the word pirate also has a negative connotation. When we say a pirate, a record, or a CD, FBI anti-piracy warning. That is using something without paying for it. For example, pirating a CD or a record, that is illegal, and you have to pay to make a copy. Everybody's talking about Microsoft Word pirated copies. And so piracy is not a victimless crime. Every time you turn on your a movie and you're watching a pirated film, even the pirated film includes pirating somebody else's film. Fish Shop points finger at Wegmans. The suit set off a legal feud between two markets. Here again, a fish store was selling a particular kind of fish and presenting it in a certain way, and the competition decided to do the same thing. So they were pirating another product. And so this is the negative use of the word to pirate something. Pirates are again in the news with the Israeli war against the Palestinians in Gaza. Yemen, the actual government in Yemen has been blocking ships from entering the Red Sea and going up to Israel. Many pirates, especially from Somalia and the west coast of the east coast of Africa, are a major threat to shipping. Oil tankers, ships coming from China filled with automobiles to Europe or South America are the targets of modern day pirates in the Indian Ocean. Now, of course, today, the pirate doesn't take a ship filled with automobiles and take them to someplace in Long Island and sell them off at cut rate prices. They hold the ship for ransom and force the owner to pay up. If, for example, it's a ship filled with grain on its way to India or someplace, they have to pay up pretty quickly because the grain will spoil. So piracy remains very much in the news even today. Now, there are good uses for the word pirate. For example, pirate radio. These are radio stations off the shore, which are not subject to government regulation. In many authoritarian countries, pirate radio is very often a opposition figure who has a boat and broadcasts radio or television shows to the country where most of the news and radio programs are heavily censored. There are pirate clubs, Pittsburgh Pirates, famous baseball club. Yes. Now, everybody asks, why do pirates for Pittsburgh? Well, when the Pittsburgh Pirates were first established, there was a Pittsburgh baseball team, and they were famous for using money to literally kidnap good baseball players from around the country and bring them to Pittsburgh. This was not commonly done. And so they started calling the Pittsburgh baseball team a gang of pirates for stealing good players from elsewhere. Well, the name stuck, and today we have the Pittsburgh Pirates. But here again, we see the golden earrings, the head and skull and crossbones, and the eye patch. Again, the symbol of the modern day pirate. East Carolina University Pirates. No idea how they adopted the name Pirates, but still, it is a name which has stuck. What is a pirate party? These are political parties that support civil rights, direct democracy, reform of copyright and patent law to encourage innovation, use of free and open source software, free sharing of knowledge. And so a pirate party is when these people oppose all of these government restrictions and demand that things like the internet, like public television, should be free and open for everybody. They oppose mass surveillance, censorship, and big tech. So, of course, they use the pirate symbols, saying that we are going to loot the big Wall Street corporations and force them to make Windows, internet, and everything else freely available for everybody. So that's what a pirate party is if you get invited. Pirate-themed parties, kids love them. Here again, we see the symbols of pirates, the skull and the bones, kids dressing up as pirates with the eye patch, the cutlass. Everybody can be hero for a day, and kids just love dressing up as a pirate. So pirates are one of these ideal American images, along with the cowboy riding into town, shooting the bad guy, and then riding off again into the sunset to have his next adventure. Superwoman flying in from someplace to rescue someone in distress. Kevin Costner's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Again, an individual who, in this case with Robin Hood, steals from the rich and gives to the poor. Very much the theme that we talked about in pirate parties. Make the internet free and available to everybody. Steal it from the big corporations and give it freely to the people. This is a typical American theme. The cowboy, the individualist, the settler, going off, confronting danger, overcoming it, and becoming a hero. Whether it is Superman, Superwoman, everybody wants this American individualism. You want to have your freedom to have your own gun. You want to resist government forcing you to do this, that, or the other thing. Belmondo's film, The Le Solitaire, again, showing the solitary individual who is out to save the world. Well, there's me taking the boat to Cherry Grove on Fire Island. I love going to Long Island and just talking to people, and everyone has a pirate treasure story to tell you. And so the pirates are part of this American cult of individualism, the American myth that anybody can emerge and become somebody great, somebody famous. The rags to riches story, the Irish immigration success story. That's what attracts immigrants today. Today, the masses coming across the border from Texas are here cashing in on the American dream. We don't talk about the Russian dream or the German dream or the English dream, because when they dream, they have that in the United States. The rugged individual. This was the American myth of the pirate. So this is Ron Brown. You can reach me at ronbrownmedia@gmail.com if you'd like to ask some questions or anything. And I hope you enjoyed today's talk. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. So this is Ron Brown signing off.